Hello, and thank you for inviting me to talk to you today about a very important subject, and that's demonstrating the value and impact of academic libraries. This has always been crucial, but it's even more important today whenever we are addressing the COVID-19 pandemic. I want to start out with some of the 2021 higher ed trends that were documented in the Guide to Research. And number one was mental health awareness. And we've heard a lot about this with self-help, not just for students, but also for staff. And so this is something we need to be thinking about in our daily lives. Artificial intelligence for learning. This is something else that library staff have been talking about and testing. And it is, again, coming to the forefront because of the way we change teaching and learning and providing engagement in this time of addressing COVID-19 pandemic. As we all know, online learning is more prevalent. We've been living that for a year now. Virtual reality for education has also been pushed to the forefront, and the rise of massive open online courses, or MOOCs. And that's something that we saw a trend probably about maybe 8 years ago. And now it's coming back, and we've seen universities promoting them again. Again, it may be it caused by the difference that has occurred within higher ed and within our daily lives because of the pandemic. Now, I'm going to talk to you about a project that OCLC Research collaborated on with the American Library Association's division, the Association of College and Research Libraries. The acronym is ACRL, and ACRL has a plan for excellence. And a major goal for this plan is to help academic librarians demonstrate the library's value to their parent institutions through their impact on institutional outcomes. As we know, a major institutional outcome is to promote student learning and success. With decreasing support and funding and this competition for resources within the academy, it becomes more intense, and the need for us to demonstrate our value becomes even more critical. And that's what I will talk to you about today. Now, I have a polling question, and I would like you to respond in chat. So, has your library aligned its strategic plan and goals with those of your institution? So, just respond yes or no, and you can elaborate as well in chat. Great, thank you so much. I also want to direct you to the report that I am talking about today, and it's called Academic Library Impact, Improving Practice and Essential Areas to Research. This publication is available free online in PDF or for purchase if you would like to have a hard copy. And the information is on the screen. So, how far have we come and what do we do next? I'm going to talk to you today about an agenda for action-based research on student learning and success. Now, for this project, the research team used 3 data sources for finding out what we need to do to demonstrate academic libraries' impact. So we first of all selected literature on student learning and success, And the documents were found in the Library and Information Science and Higher Education databases. We also conducted focus group interviews with advisory group members. So we had members of an advisory group representing a variety of different types of academic libraries. Again, I must tell you that this is a US-based study. And so we had community college leaders, we had four-year college and university college leaders, and we tried to get representation from different parts of the United States, so different regions, as well as public, private, secular, and non-secular institutions. The advisory group members had to agree to provide us feedback throughout the process of data collection and to also put us in touch with provosts or similarly high-level academic administrators in their institutions. Why? Because we then conducted individual semi-structured interviews with the provost from each of the advisory group members' institutions. So this was an iterative process in which we used the findings from each of these data collection sources to inform the other data collection processes. So we had the focus group interviews, the provost individual interviews, and they were based on the themes that we initially identified in the database searches for the literature. So first I want to talk about the literature selection. So we were asked to look at the literature indexed by the Library and Information Science and the higher education databases from 2010 to 2016. Remember, this report was published in 2017. We also looked at the themes that came out of the 2010 ACRL Value of Academic Library Report. And we looked at mostly articles published in the US. However, we did include studies that were published outside of the US that we felt were relevant for this project. Many of those came from Australia and the UK. Now, here's a word cloud of the themes by frequency of documents that they were presented in. And as you know, the larger the word, the more documents were included in that theme. And again, I want to call attention to some of the words that are quite large. You'll see service, you'll see collaboration, you'll see communication, and you'll see learning in college. And I will talk about these in more detail as I continue through this report. This has a lot going on in this figure, but we are looking at the differences in proportion of themes by literature type. So the orange is a combination of higher education and LIS. This is the literature. The burgundy color is higher education, and the turquoise blue color is from library and information science literature. So you'll see that a combination of higher ed and LIS literature composes about 52% of the literature that we reviewed. About 18% of the literature was in higher education journals. And you can see that we had a large percent of 284 from the LIS. And when you look at these, you will see again that service comes up a lot in both the higher ed and LIS journal literature. Then look at the higher ed literature. That service diminishes. So the use of that term diminishes in the literature that our academic administrators are reading. And then look at the LIS literature for service and how it is much larger than that of what appears in higher ed. You can see collections, collaborations, service in college. success in college, accreditation comes up minimally, and we'll see that in some of the other slides. Now, with the focus group interviews, we had 14 advisory group members, as I said. We conducted focus group interviews, and we had 2 of them. Several of the advisory group members could not attend the focus group interviews. So there were 3 of them where we sent them the questions and had them complete and answer these questions. These responses were also included in our analysis. So we did thematic coding. So we looked for these themes that I've already showed you. And one team member coded and then another team member checked so that we could be sure that we were looking at this more broadly and had reliability. So in this graphic, you can see the frequency of the themes that we coded in for the focus group interviews. And you will see that communication came up 20% of the time, collaboration 17%, and their service again 16%. Accreditation was mentioned less frequency, actually barely mentioned. With the provost individual interviews, we had 14 provosts. And remember, provosts are equivalent to rectors, chancellors, vice presidents. They're called by different names outside of the US and even within the US. We had 3 team members interview the provost on the phone, and we recorded the interviews. 9 of the 14 interviews were transcribed. The other 5 of the interviews were deemed to have too low sound quality, and so the team members took in-depth notes, and then we recorded some of the juicy quotes, as we called them, from these provost interviews. So we always took notes as well as recorded. These interviews lasted about 45 minutes on average. We had very detailed notes. We also used NVivo, which is a qualitative software program for analysis, and we used the thematic coding scheme. And again, we had 1 team member code and another check because we wanted to look and be sure we had reliability. The themes discussed by the provost were communication 17% of the time, and that matches with what we heard from our advisory group members. Also, institutional planning came up and learning in college. You will notice that accreditation came up 2% of the time. So the top themes for focus group interviews with librarians were communication, collaboration, and institutional planning. Now let's look at the themes between both the advisory group and the provost. And you'll see communication is very similar. We have collaboration. That comes up more with our advisory group members than it did with the provost. Service, once again, more with the library advisory group members than with the provost. And you see institutional planning more with the provost than the advisory group members. So the provost discussed learning in college more than the advisory group members. The advisory group members focused more on service than the provost. Also, advisory group members focused more on collaboration than the provost. Now, when we look at the most frequently quoted themes between the literature, the focus groups, and the provost individual interviews, you'll see service in the literature comes up most frequently, then collaboration and learning in college. With the focus groups, with the advisory group, communication, collaboration, and service. And with the provost, communication, institutional planning, and learning in college. And so when you look at that learning in college, it's also coming up in the literature. Again, that service keeps coming up. I'm going to give you some quotes from both advisory group members and provosts. And these are direct quotes from our interviews. And I'm doing this so that you can see and hear what these individuals are talking about that will help you understand the recommendations that we have at the end. So this is an advisory group member from a research university that's secular and public. And the individual said, there's one thing when I was sitting there thinking about a lot of what's come out is that we're not islands. Not that we ever were, but I think part of our success in reaching to students and faculty is the way we collaborate with others. One thing I will say is I think it seems to need to be sort of a multi-level communication from the provost to those relationships you have with other units, like the Centers for Teaching and Learning, to the academic units, to the individual relationships that librarians and staff have with faculty and students. You know, all of those levels reinforce each other, and any alone doesn't quite work as well. So I've been talking about these language differences. Librarians use service, provosts use more specific terms, teaching and learning, customer service, often a term that we are hesitant to use in the library environment, and space. This is a quote from a provost from a research university that is public and secular. And the provost said, librarians have to be able to sell to the deans. And this is something valuable that the deans want to be a part of, and that the deans are going to be impacted by their faculty feeling like this is a worthy thing. Because if we use money for one thing, we can't use it for something else. I think customer service becomes really important in this kind of environment. What I interpret this provost as saying is that you need to build relationships as a library staff with your faculty, and library administrators need to build relationships with the deans, with their peers. And we need to sell to them the library and what we bring to teaching and learning and to the institutional goals. Why? Because we're all vying for the same resources. And so selling is something that we often do not think about as academics, but it's important that we think about customer service and relationship building. I'm going to talk a little bit now about the academic library value and impact. And this is a quote from one of our advisory members from a research university, secular and private. I'm going to read to you the beginning of this quote so that you can get this in context. The individual said, if I'm understanding you correctly, and referring to another advisory board member's statement, the whole kind of conversation around fake news is this really important example of how important it is in our daily life and our civic health in order to bring critical skills to bear on understanding and information and being able to critically evaluate the source of that. And this individual is really pointing towards our information literacy, something that we as librarians have excelled at doing within the academy, and how important it is to think not just in terms of the academic life of the individual and making critical choices, but also in the individual's everyday life. This is a quote from a provost. And what the provost is also saying here is that students, we need to let students know what they're getting from their education. And it has to be this something that will transcend into their everyday lives. And so this individual was also talking about how the academy is going to have to make a statement about the value and impact of education on individuals' lives when it comes to getting government funding. And you'll notice that there's, in this quote, there's reference to the Trump administration. I conducted 3 interviews the day after the election in 2016, the presidential election in the US. So this was going to be a very different environment. And so these provosts were very concerned about how they were going to make the case for the importance of higher education. And this is another quote from an advisory group member from a research university that was private, non-secular. And this individual said, I think each of us would have some example of our shared strategic initiatives around enhancing student success and promoting innovation and teaching and learning. What's underlying all of this is that all of us see our work as directly tied to the mission of the university. Academic libraries are those directly connected to the mission of their unique institution. Again, this is very important about tying the academic library's strategic plans and goals and all of our activities to the goals and mission of the institution. I really like this quote from a provost from a research university that is private and non-secular. And the beginning of the quote is, there's not one specific thing a library can do because the environments are so different. And what this provost is saying is the way that libraries can impact learning is contextually bound because of the dependency on the mission and goals unique to the institution, and the importance of context in shaping how librarians communicate value is exemplified by this quote. And so that's something that we have to always keep in mind. It's very institutionally specific. Another quote from a provost, a research university, secular, public. And this provost is saying that the biggest concern is that the students aren't coming together. There's a hunger within our undergraduate student population to actually socialize. And the library has always been this place on campus. And it serves this capacity for pooling students together. And we've heard this a lot in some of our other research, and the concern about the library being that center, that place, especially with in the times of this pandemic, when some libraries, sometimes most libraries, all libraries were closed at some point. And how do we continue to have that gathering place in a virtual environment? I really like this quote from an advisory group member who's from a research university that's secular and public. And this individual said, only sharing space, such as within the library, like a writing or computer lab, with another academic department, is very low level. And he was saying many academic libraries do this. But there needs to be cooperative programming and interaction. So collaborative work with students and faculty together. This is again from a provost, and at the beginning of this quote, the provost said, for so long, librarians have had a role of support rather than integration into work. Much more of a partnership rather than support is needed. So it's proactive in its orientation rather than reactive. The way many of our faculty and students research now, it's less about going to a physical space. This is a quote from an advisory group member. And what the advisory group member is discussing is user data collection. And this then brings us to the topic of privacy. However, privacy only was mentioned once in these conversations, but it's still an important area for exploration. The topic is particularly fraught in the areas of assessment and academic libraries, since there is a lack of established best practices and standards addressing the methods and contexts that may threaten the privacy of students. For this reason, privacy, when broadly defined, can be viewed by librarians in some instances as less of an ethics issue and more of an impediment as articulated by this quote. And also, when we talk to other individuals on campus, they collect data about students. And if we would collaborate with these other academic service departments, we could create and develop a better picture of our students and ways to help them succeed. And that leads me to this quote by a provost from a four-year college, non-secular private, where he's saying that we, the academic community, should really be helping people learn how to think, how to be skeptical, how to question, how to learn and to use critical thinking skills, to be self-reflective. And I think that is something that we in academic libraries can actually do when we're working with students, when we're working with faculty, and collaborating with faculty to develop courses. And it's really important to not just think about the students' academic lives, but also to think about the students' everyday lives and helping them become better citizens, making good decisions for themselves and their communities. We have highlighted 6 priority areas. Communicate the library's contributions to the institution. Match library assessment to the institution's mission. By that we mean that you need to assess the services, the collections, the programming that you provide to your users, but from a user-centered perspective. Include library data and institutional data collection. So those are all the data that we collect within our libraries. Share that, compile that with other academic units so that we can tell a more broader, fuller picture. Quantify the library's impact on student success, which we can do if we do these 3 previous priority areas. We can also then enhance teaching and learning by building relationships and collaborating with faculty. And also collaborate with educational stakeholders. And I have one more polling question for you. I want you to think about if you are on campus and you see the provost in the campus coffee shop, do you have a 2-minute impromptu speech ready to tell the story of how the library contributes to the institutional mission and goals? Anything, something that may have happened last week, something that may have happened today. Please answer yes or no and explain in the chat. I'll give you a moment to do that. Based on these findings, we've come up with the following recommendations. Identify and articulate both learning and success outcomes. So how do you do that? Well, number one, engage students in your assessment. It's very important to have user-centered assessment. If you're thinking of redesigning the library space, involve the students, do mapping, do interviews with them, and this will help to demonstrate the library's impact on learning outcomes. Also look at the resources from your collections, any of the services that you offer. Look at that usage and work with other academic service departments and come up with the data to actually document how the library is really impacting and contributing to students' success. Focus less on service and more on sharing. It can be sharing space, programs, working with groups both on and off campus. A great example is this group of Finnish University Libraries. You can work together, as I'm sure you are, but it's really much easier to work with others when you're doing assessment. So maybe come up with one area, one service, maybe a collection that you share, and actually assess that, evaluate that, and identify how this contributes to the student learning and success within your institutions. You also need to bolster collaboration with other campus units or external partners, including consortia or assessment-based efforts. Now, with the research we've done on the pandemic and academic and public libraries, we've learned that it's quite important to actually collaborate with community agencies and community services. And that's something you can think about here as well. We know there are issues with student hunger. Maybe collaborate with the community food banks. So there are other ways to contribute both on campus and within your community, and to actually measure and document how this really impacts student learning and success. It's all about communication. And you saw this from the literature review that we did. You saw this from the conversations we had with provosts and from the discussions we had with our advisory group members. It's all about communication. We need to sell and market what we as an academic library community bring to the institution and how we contribute to the mission and goals of this institution. So think marketing, customer service, relationship building, and communication. Study the assessment and student-centered outcomes of diverse populations across various institutions using multiple methods. What this means is work together within this group. As a perfect example, you probably have different student populations, different types of students, different learning environments, and use different methods for data collection. We have outlined many of these in the report that we published with ACRL. So you can look at that to get some ideas, but this could be a great collaborative effort for your group. Again, continue to develop and foster relationships and engagement, not only within your staff, within your communities, but also with academic administrators, other academic departments, students, faculties. Think about your Office of Sponsored Programs, your Office of Research Support, all of the teaching and learning departments. and really think about how you can work with them. One of the things that the ACRL did was they provided grants for academic librarians to work on some of these assessment projects and to work with faculty or other academic staff on campus. And so these institutions were funded based on collaboration. And this really worked well in documenting and defining how the academic libraries really do impact student learning and success. And represent data in different contexts and use visualizations. And this is something that I too am trying to learn. People are busy, especially academic administrators. And so you really need to think about getting to the point, highlighting the top ideas that you want to get across. What are the major ideas that you want to be heard? And don't ever forget that a picture is 1,000 words. If you can come up with a visualization, that would be great. And think back to that poll of that 2-minute impromptu conversation. Think about that and representing how the academic library really impacts student learning and success. This is another quote from a provost from a research university that's secular and private. I see that libraries play a role as a partner, facilitating both learning and doing in new and different ways, both helping all of us to embrace information in critical and yet meaningful ways. And I think this is great because this provost is looking at library staff as partners, not as support staff. And what we learned with our research during the pandemic is that it is extremely important to be agile and flexible, and that many library leaders had to change the way they did business from a Friday afternoon until a Monday morning. And they did it. And so we can be the leaders on campus and thinking and leading in new ways and different ways of teaching and learning. I don't know if any of you are familiar with a white paper by Brian Matthews that was published in 2012, and it's called Think Like a Startup, a white paper to inspire library entrepreneurship. And if you haven't read this, I suggest you do, because what Matthews said in 2012 resonates today extremely well. By focusing on relationship building instead of service excellence, organizations can uncover new needs and be in position to make a stronger impact. I will open up now this discussion and questions. And so I want to again thank you for inviting me, and I'm very happy to answer questions now and to hear from you.